It's 9 o'clock. We are waiting on, I believe, 3 more commission members who should be here. So let's hold for just a couple of minutes. And if they don't arrive in a couple of minutes, we'll go ahead and get started. We have some preliminary things to talk about anyway, but give me a couple of minutes and see if they arrive, and then we'll get started. I must have done, well, I was coming from the welcome everyone this morning. I'm going to go ahead and do the conflict of interest statement, as we're required to do at the beginning of every meeting. North Carolina General Statute 138A-15 requires that the chair remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest. The chair also needs to inquire whether there is any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board today. Does any member know of any conflict of interest regarding any of the action items on the agenda today? Seeing none. Before we go to the first action, which is approving the minutes, there are a few things I wanted to mention. One is I wanted to welcome our 2 new members, Dr. Lyerly and Jill Weiss. Dr. Lyerly's on the faculty at Duke Medical School. Many of the staff may have met Jill Weiss, who recently retired from the Attorney General's office, and so has had experience, especially with water resources programs and earlier in her career with air quality. So welcome both of them. And I have expressed my thanks personally to both Commissioner Arata and Commissioner Lazoric for their service. I wanted to make that appreciation known publicly as well. They did great work on the commission, were very generous with their time, and we wish them well. The 2 new members have submitted and received from the Ethics Commission their ethics statements, submitted their ethics statements, received their ethics letters. I'm going to defer to Council Reynolds, who needs to read into the record the relevant portions of those ethics letters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, the new members, Dr. Lyerly and Commissioner Weiss, have received their ethics evaluations, and so as required, I'll read the relevant portions in and note for the record that the full evaluations will be kept on file and available as public records. So first, we'll start with Dr. Lyerly. Our office has received Dr. Herbert Kim Lyerly's 2022 Statement of Economic Interest as a prospective appointee to the Environmental Management Commission. We have reviewed it for actual and potential conflicts of interest pursuant to Chapter 138A of the North Carolina General Statutes, also known as the State Government Ethics Act. We did not find an actual conflict of interest or the likelihood of a conflict of interest. The Act establishes ethical standards for certain public servants and prohibits public servants from 1, using their position for their financial benefit or for the benefit of their extended family or business, and 2, participating in official actions from which they or certain associated persons might receive a reasonably foreseeable financial benefit. The Act also requires public servants to take appropriate steps to remove themselves from proceedings in which their impartiality might be reasonably questioned due to their familial, personal, or financial relationship with the participant to those proceedings. Dr. Lyerly will fill the role of the physician serving on the commission. So the rest of that, if, Madam Chair, will be available on the record. And then for Commissioner Weiss, our office has received Ms. Elizabeth Jill Weiss' 2022 Statement of Economic Interest as prospective appointee to the Environmental Management Commission. We have reviewed it for actual and potential conflicts of interest pursuant to Chapter 138A of the North Carolina General Statutes, also known as the State Government Ethics Act. We did not find an actual conflict of interest or the likelihood for a conflict of interest. As with Dr. Lyerly, the same prohibitions apply Commissioner Weiss. And should any conflicts of interest arise for either one of them, they should note those on the record pursuant to bylaws. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you and extend my welcome to you both, especially Commissioner Weiss. No offense to Dr. Lyerly, but Commissioner Weiss and I worked together for a number of years, and I am excited to be able to work with her again.
Thank you. And I also wanted to note that we are welcoming back, you probably never missed her, Commissioner Deerhake, who has been officially reappointed. So congratulations, Commissioner Deerhake, and really appreciate her willingness to continue to serve. She's done a lot of heavy lifting in the last couple of years in particular, I know. I'll also note, I believe all the commission members know this, but just as a matter of public interest, that Commissioner Kelvington has resigned from the commission. We received that notice from the President Pro Tem's office. Since she is a legislative appointee, her replacement would need to be done by act of the General Assembly, so we don't expect a new appointee until the General Assembly is back in session. They are planning to be back in session, I believe, November 15th, if that doesn't change, but that doesn't really tell us much about what the expected time frame is. But just to let you know, there will be a vacancy until such time as the General Assembly approves a new appointment to that seat. What else? We have a lot of announcements this morning. I've asked Lois to circulate today the dates for the 2023 meeting. She said those are set and the public notice will go out today, and you should receive an email with those dates today. We are not planning to have lunch brought in today because we have a short agenda. And at the end of the meeting, I'll ask Council Reynolds to talk a little bit about the process for the remissions committees. It's highly likely they will begin early today, but in terms of the timing, it looks like our agenda is going to be short enough for either a lunch break or to go straight through the remissions committees and still be done early. So I believe that's all, other than one agenda note at the end of the meeting in the EMC chair comments, which I usually waive as a mercy act, as much as anything else. I do have a couple of things I need to mention. Commission members all received a letter from an attorney representing the town of Reidsville, making an inquiry about the status of the 149 rule. And I will address that letter at the end of the meeting, as well as an email that I believe everyone received yesterday from the Stormwater Association. So we'll get to those at the end of the agenda today, and that will be brief. So I think we can move to the first action item, which is approval of the minutes of the September 8th meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Commissioner Bailey, I so move.
Commissioner Bailey moves approval. Is there a second?
I second.
Commissioner McAdams seconds the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. And the first real action item, I will call on Ms. Quinlan from the Division of Air Quality. This is the request for approval of rule revisions and fiscal note to go to public hearing on amendments to rules concerning electronic submission of documents.
All right, good morning, commissioners. I'm Catherine Quinlan with the Rules Development Branch of the Division of Air Quality. And as mentioned, I'll be presenting our fiscal note and proposed rule amendments to allow electronic submittal of documents for a request to proceed to public hearing. So for some brief background, some of the current air quality rules in subchapters 2D and 2Q currently require physical hard copies of correspondence records and applications, or they imply hard copies. And then other rules just simply don't specify the format of those records. And so we could benefit from some clarification within the rules. So further, throughout the last 2 years in response to the pandemic, a lot of these records have been received and reviewed electronically as staff work remotely, but as required by our rules, applicants still have to provide one or more, in some cases, paper copies of these applications. So DAQ is proposing amendments to 18 air quality rules throughout subchapters 2D and 2Q, and these are mainly to allow the electronic copies of applications, submittals, records, and correspondence where we're currently requiring those physical hard copies. And so these proposed rule amendments facilitate our department's transition towards streamlining and digitizing our permitting process and agency record storage. And so that includes the launch of a Laserfish digital document repository that will serve as the official location of agency records through which the public can view these records remotely. And then the development of a Chrome Air compliance system to receive federal records. And then further along after that would be the incorporation into the DEQ self-service permit portal to receive electronic applications and feeds. So the main revisions that we're proposing are in these two rules, 2Q 104 and 2D 605, and the revisions are very similar. So 2Q 104 deals with how to submit applications, and then 2D 605 is how to submit other records, mainly compliance reports and things along those lines. So in 2Q 104, we have revised paragraph A to allow forms to be obtained online, or if requested in hard copy format, we can still provide that. But most of these forms are being obtained online, so we added that option into the rule. And then in paragraph B, applications must continue to be received in hard copy format until the division makes available a system for receiving applications electronically, and we've outlined those procedures in paragraph C. And so once we have made available that system, the applications can be received electronically if the applicant chooses to provide it that way. Title V applications have to be submitted through a Chrome Air compliance system, and we will identify that on our permitting website. And then for minor source applications that are provided electronically, they must be submitted as we specify on our website, which may be the same system as the Title V applications. And then the revisions to 2D 605 are in paragraph I, and they're very similar. They mirror and even reference the requirements of 2Q 104. So records must continue to be received in hard copy format until we make available a system for receiving them electronically. And then we've identified those procedures in subparagraph 2, which references 2Q 104. And then we've made some other more minor revisions that mostly align with this process. So we've replaced regional office addresses with our DEQ website so that if an address changes or contact information changes, we can update it more easily and more quickly. We updated URLs. We've cross-referenced these two rules that I just outlined on the previous slide throughout the rules to have everything pointing to one process and procedure for clarity and consistency across our rules. We've revised methods for obtaining notification forms, and we've removed requirements for mailing, notifying notifications for permit public notices, and we've just changed that to notification requirements. We're not removing the option of mailing these notices, but no one is requesting these mails and notices right now. They're all provided electronically. So these are a lot of the same changes. We've just clarified things of charges only apply to requested paper copies, replaced our reference to the central files with public access portal for viewing these Laserfish documents. And then just we added an option for electronic fee payments in 2Q 206, and then just made other clarifying changes throughout the rules that align with all of these new processes. So in several of the rules, we've also removed the requirement for multiple copies of letters, since everything will be provided electronically. If there are other, parts of the division that need a copy besides the permit section, those electronic copies can be provided. Replace mailing addresses with, again, cross-references to those main two rules that we talked about. So for the fiscal note, we submitted the draft fiscal note to the Office of State Budget and Management on August 23rd, and we originally estimated that these would be minimal financial benefits. After further, and that's where we were at the AQC. After further analysis, the draft fiscal note was revised, and we estimated benefits to the DAQ and the regulated community after assessing how much paper we really do receive annually. And so we did get an approved fiscal note by OSBM on September 23rd. And in that fiscal note, we estimated savings to DAQ of approximately $59,000 to about $118,000 annually. And this is from reduced staff time spent digitizing those hard copy records, removing all the bindings, scanning, assigning appropriate naming convention, all of those things. If they're received digitally, we can bypass all of those steps. And then we estimated savings to the regulated community of around $11,000 to $22,000 annually. And this is from just decreased paper usage, printer ink maintenance, things along those lines. And then we also just wanted to note that we believe there are going to be significant qualitative benefits with this rulemaking. So streamlined record submittal process, benefits to the regulated community as well as DAQ, increased access and quality of public records for the public, and hopefully just a more streamlined and straightforward process for submitting these. So for the tentative rulemaking timeline, we're here to request to proceed to public comment and hearing. If we receive that approval, we'll proceed to public comment and hearing. We expect to be requesting adoption of these rules by the EMC in May of next year. RRC approval in June, which would place us having an effective date of July 1st, 2023. So with that, the director recommends that the EMC authorize a public hearing on the proposed rule amendments and accompanying fiscal note to allow electronic submittal of documents and for the chairman to appoint a member or members of the EMC to serve as hearing officer. And with that, I can take any questions.
Are there any members of the Air Quality Committee, Commissioner Modest, any other members who would like to speak to their discussion of the draft rules? And if not, are there other questions for Ms. Quinlan? Commissioner Deerhag?
I'll just say that when we first heard it, I wanted to be certain that the option remained for paper submittals if there were folks who just did not have the broadband capabilities to do it. And we were assured that that's the case, correct?
That is the case. That's the way we've written the rules, so that the submittal of documents and applications electronically is an option for applicants, but not a requirement.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Quinlan? I have one question. It may be taken care of by the fact that this is optional, but are there situations where trade secrets are going to be an issue? And if so, how are those dealt with in an electronic filing and access situation?
So from what I understand, I mean, yes, we can receive such documents. I think I might have to defer to our director about how we would deal with the specific technology of receiving those.
Mr. Representative?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's ironic you asked that question because we just finalized revisions to our internal procedure memo on how to handle confidential business information that we receive. And so it's quite a lengthy process. I will share with you that we have a process. I can't recite to you every step in that process currently, but it is now revised, available on our website and shared with our stakeholders. And we recently did internal training on how to follow through with that new CBI procedure memo, given the transition and flipping the switch to the Laserfish system here this month.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, is there a motion? The committee recommended that the rules be sent to public notice with the regulatory impact analysis. Is there a motion to that effect? Commissioner Modest.
Let's see, I move to, thank you, authorize a see. Yeah, authorize a public hearing on the proposed rule amendments and accompanying fiscal note to allow electronic submittal of documents and for the chairman to appoint members of the EMC to serve as hearing officers. Is that a good enough?
That is good enough.
Okay.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Carter. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. Thank you, Ms. Quinlan. The next agenda item concerns approval of the hearing officer's report on rule readoptions related to regulation of surface water transfers. And Mr. Peel from the Division of Water Resources.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Environmental Management Commission members. Again, my name is Linwood Peel, and I'm with the Water Planning Section of the Division of Water Resources. And today, we're here to request approval of the hearing officer report on the proposed rule readoption to 15A NCAC 02E, the 0400 regulation of water transfer rules, known as the IBT rules. And finally, this is the last section of the water registration and allocation rules. The 100, 300, 500, and 600 became effective beginning of January 1st of 2022. There was a bit of a delay in these rules because of a contested case, IBT case, as well as a legislative report that was due January 15th. 2021. So there's a big difference between the time that these rules first started to now. But in March of 2021, the Division of Water Resources began reconvened drafting the rules, and the staff, we began drafting rules. And once we finished the rules, we sent them over to the Rules Review Commission for their pre-review. And they had several comments, and staff, we added their comments into the process. Then we went out during the summer and invited our stakeholders to comment on the draft. We got Barron's comments and concerns. And then in November, we brought the draft rules with the stakeholders working with us to the Water Allocation Committee and updated you all on the rules. And then in January, the Water Allocation Committee approved to come to the EMC to provide the 0400 IBT rules to you. And on February 3rd, 2022, the regulatory impact analysis was approved by the Office of State Budget and Management. And of course, March of this year, the EMC approved the rules to go to public notice and hearing. Excuse me. And the information was in early April, the information was sent over to the North Carolina Register, and it was registered on April 18th, 2022. And the public comment period was between April 18th and June 17th in 2022. Commissioner, at the time, former Commissioner Jenny Kevinton served as the hearing officers, and we had a virtual public meeting where staff was, along with the hearing officers, were on site on May 6th, 2022. There were 12 people attended the virtual meeting, and one person spoke and provided comments at that time. And those comments was also submitted in written form as well. We received 7 individuals who provided, or association who provided comments prior to the comment closing period, but within that 7 individuals, we had 61 different comments. And just give you a high overview, the comment proposals was just simple, just general changes and additions to the rule language on both sides. General comments on definitions, applicability, environmental documents, final determination. But out of the 61 comments, 20 was general comments dealing with emergency transfer. And as I go through the changes, there were several different issues, comments that came up regarding that. And all comments are summarized with the responses in the hearing officer report. And as you go through it, it appears that some of them are the same, but it was different stakeholders who had similar comments on the same issue. And most of them was within the emergency transfer. And then the recommended changes made to the text is also a part of Appendix A in the hearing officer report. The next 7 slides give you a general idea of the changes that we did make. And the emergency transfer, of course, it had the most changes. And this in the stakeholders process and the rule process, we tried to, expand the definition to make it more clear. But majority of people said we were going too far on both sides. Some said it was too strict and some said it wasn't strict enough. So we went with to mirror the statutes, to stay safe. Next, there were several definitions, and grandfather capacity was a term that we've been using ever since the program been put in place. But because of the comment that grandfather shouldn't be used, we went back to the statutes, and this term at that time was pre-existing transfer capacity. So it was a longer word, and I guess that's how it changed. I wasn't here in 93 when it happened, but in 95 when I got here, that was the definition. So we went back to pre-existing transfer capacity, and we're going to update the local water supply plan because it's in there several times, and it's also in all the worksheets to calculate IBT, the process. The next was environmental documents. And in this particular one, this section for the environmental documents, the concern was, if a basin-wide hydrologic model is not in place or we don't have one, how would we do analysis? Before the hydrologic models was even developed, we used to use spreadsheet calculations, and our former chair, way back, Dr. Monroe, he would always say it was easier to use spreadsheets where he could see the numbers. In a model, it was like hidden in a black box. So there is ways to do analysis. And so we would continue to work with water systems and determine by the department and the applicant what's the best means of doing that analysis if there isn't a model available. But it's the same way, the same calculations are done by hand or by a model. Next, Commissioner Kevinton actually helped in this section here a lot because this particular one is talking about the feasibility of a project over a 30-year period. The simple answer here is, we look at if a system can't afford a project and pay for it within a 30-year period. This is what the statement is getting at. But the 30-year in itself, she thought it was appropriate to just have other appropriate projections, and then the EMC could weigh in on if that time period is long enough to really determine the cost. So it kind of expanded that, and we appreciate her comments on that. Next, emergency transfer, and as I mentioned, this particular comment is recommended rules making it explicit that agencies set terms of a transfer in the approval. And in the process itself, in section B, subsection B, the language actually allows the department, the secretary, to establish that within, before it is even established, during the time of the request. Next, this gets at the notification period, and so basically, this just states that the request for emergency transfer and the time limit that is given. And this is where we was trying to expand the definition of emergency transfer, where some are anticipated and some is unanticipated. But they felt that we was going outside of what the statute actually said because everything is under Section D, emergency transfer and temporary transfer is within the same. So in this case, we just kept it the same. And we just removed the term approved because regardless, if the process, we still need the notification during that period of time. And the last one was, this, gets at, eliminating subsection F because it allows water systems who already have an emergency interconnection to transfer water without telling us. And so we removed that from the rule itself since the statute already has that it has to be provided to the secretary of any type of emergency transfer. And those are minor changes because, I was questioned by our DEQ rule coordinator, Jennifer Everett, who helped us tremendously in this process. And we sent it over to the general counsel's office, and Drew Hargrove said these were minor changes because the significant changes rule Review Commission will send them back. And with that said, today we're here to, to bring the rules to the EMC. And we met with Commissioner Kevinson back in September and reviewed the comments, and she worked with us, and we agreed that this was minor changes, and we were asked to bring them today. Therefore, if we can get them approved, the hearing officer and adopt the rules today, we'll pass them over to, Jennifer will pass them over to the Rules Review Commission for their review and approval, and they will become effective January 1st, 2023. And the recommendation, from the former Commissioner Kevinson was this motion that readopt with substantive changes 15A NCAC 02E, the 04, 01, 4, and 42, and adopt 04, 03 through 0409 as written in the attachment A and the proposed rules of the hearing officer report and associated regulatory impact analysis that was approved by OSBM in Appendix B of the hearing officer report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peel. Are there questions for Mr. Peel? Commissioner Bailey?
This is just a question kind of on the way this hearing report was put together. There's several public comments that are in here, and then the response is simply comment noted. And I thought there was more of a standard where you're supposed to respond why you will or will not, make a change because of that comment.
Yes, that's in several spots, and in those spots, it was other additional things behind that, but the comment noted, and sometimes it was outside of the purview of the rules itself. In several cases, it was outside of the rules.
I guess I would say we need to say that instead of just comment noted, because that doesn't really give the person who commented, I'm not asking you to make a change now. I just feel like the public who made that comment needs to know, oh, that was outside the scope of this or something like that. It's kind of threw out there.
Okay, because to give you a great example of that on page A5, it was page 2 had the following after line 20C. Maximum withdrawal capacity is the calculation based on the physical capacity of the intake, pipe size, and pumps to withdraw water. That is true. So, I mean, there's no answer that we can give except that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, well, no changes were necessary or something like that. It just sounds like, oh yeah, we read that, got it, on to the next one. I'm not trying to, I just think it should be a little clearer when someone takes the time to write those comments.
Okay. Understood.
Any other questions for Mr. Peel? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the hearing officer's report and adopt the rules with the changes recommended in the hearing officer's report? Commissioner Anderson?
So moved.
Commissioner Anderson moves approval. Is there a second to the motion?
I second.
Commissioner McAdams seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? No opposition. Thank you, Mr. Peel. So the rules are adopted with the hearing officer's report and the regulatory impact analysis. As Mr. Peel indicated, that means the rules will now go to the Rules Review Commission for review, and we'll see how that goes. The next agenda item is an information item, and we'll call on Director Abrazinskis. As some of you may know, Governor Cooper issued a new executive order about 2 weeks ago concerning North Carolina's potential adoption of new clean truck emissions standards. And so this is just an initial information presentation about the issue and what may be coming to us in the next few months. So not an action item. Mr. Abrazinskis.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. That's right. This is a rulemaking concept this morning focused on the potential adoption of a proposed California Clean Trucks rule. So this morning, I'm going to cover the triggering action, Executive Order 271, the role of transportation sector emissions in our overall greenhouse gas inventory, an overview of some of the executive actions to date to reduce emissions in this sector. Overall, looking at transportation sector emissions of PM 2.5, we're going to take a look at that this morning. Some of the Cleaner Act provisions that apply, the Advanced Clean Truck Standard itself, and then finish with next steps and a proposed timeline. So Governor Cooper issued Executive Order 271 just over 2 weeks ago on October 25th, 2022, directing action to accelerate the state's transition to a clean energy economy that creates good jobs and opportunities for all North Carolinians while protecting public health and the environment. The order positions North Carolina to benefit from the global market transition to zero-emission vehicles, such as vans, buses, and trucks, by ensuring that new vehicle technologies will be available to businesses across the state and directing state agencies to pursue strategies and investments that will support the affordable, equitable, and reliable growth of the zero-emission vehicle market. By reducing emissions from these vehicles that will impact North Carolinians and especially low-income communities and communities of color, the order will encourage economic development and job growth across the state, maximize consumer choice for small businesses, and advance the state's climate and environmental justice initiatives. So auto manufacturers are increasingly committing to the production of zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, and a growing number of businesses in the state are transitioning to ZEVs to save money, remain economically competitive, and meet their corporate sustainability goals. Executive Order 271, Section 1 directs DEQ and DAQ to work with stakeholders to propose to you all here at the EMC an Advanced Clean Trucks, or ACT program, that would ensure zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles such as trucks, buses, vans, etc., are available for purchase in the state. The ACT would require manufacturers to sell an increasing percentage of zero-emission vehicles over time while providing flexibility to those manufacturers through credits, trading, and other features as segments of the market grow at different speeds. The sales targets in this rule would drive investment in other zero-emission technologies, including the charging infrastructure needed, and enhance consumer choice while bolstering North Carolina's competitiveness in seeking billions of dollars in federal funding for clean energy development. There are numerous tax credits, loans, grants, and incentive programs that will be available to North Carolina and North Carolinians through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Those dollars will support a comprehensive strategy for the state to support automakers, fleet owners, and other partners to grow this medium and heavy-duty ZEV market through investment in charging infrastructure, purchase incentives, workforce development, demonstration projects, technical assistance, and other strategies identified through development of the North Carolina Clean Transportation Plan, which is being led by NCDOT. We've received some preliminary feedback from manufacturers and other stakeholders that this ACT program may not be successful if you don't have complementary strategies to ensure a functional market and demand for vehicles. And so Executive Order 271, through these other sections, respond to this feedback by outlining a whole-of-government approach aimed at supporting ACT's success in a manner that encourages local economic development and centers health equity and environmental justice. The Department of Health and Human Services, or DHHS, will also take steps to increase understanding of the disproportionate health impacts of bus and truck emissions on underserved communities in North Carolina and people of color, including by publishing a commentary on environmental justice impacts of transportation-related air pollutants, incorporating the very best available air quality and environmental justice metrics into the DHHS environmental health data dashboard, and notifying community stakeholders about relevant funding opportunities to address the health impacts of transportation-related emissions. There's a section that reminds cabinet agencies to lead by example, to walk the walk in transitioning to ZEVs in the state's motor fleet, including the buses and trucks covered by the ACT program. And under the order, DEQ will enhance public-private partnerships by expanding the Environmental Stewardship Initiative, or ESI program, to support and recognize companies and facilities that increase the share of ZEVs in their medium and heavy-duty fleets. So I've used the term medium and heavy-duty vehicles several times thus far, and I thought it's important that we define that for everyone, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so this is what we're referring to. Truck classifications are typically based on gross vehicle weight ratings. The ACT rule impacts vehicle weight rating classes 2B through Class 8. So an example of a Class 2B vehicle, and they would start at about 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight rating, would be something like a F-250 or F-350 dually, a large hauling pickup truck. Even some of the Amazon delivery step vans might fall into that weight class. At the other end of the spectrum are the Class 7 and 8 vehicles, like a cement truck, a transit bus, or a long-haul tractor. I'll note that many manufacturers that sell vehicles in these weight classes have committed to selling ZEVs in increasing numbers in their corporate sustainability goals. All right, so let's look at the role of the transportation sector in our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And I've reported out to the Air Quality Committee earlier this year that our division updated our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That update focused on some of the primary sources of greenhouse gas emissions and some key takeaways from that update. Between 2005 and 2018, North Carolina reduced net GHG emissions by 23%. While North Carolina's population and real gross state product grew by 19 and 24% respectively. The inventory also includes projections, so forward-looking projections. So by 2030, the net GHG emissions are forecast to decrease by 39% relative to a 2005 baseline, with the inclusion of important policies such as the reductions mandated by House Bill 951. The transportation sector in this inventory update became the leading sector currently of our greenhouse gases in North Carolina, now accounting for 36% of the state's gross GHG emissions. And that sector is projected to decrease emissions at a much slower rate compared to the projected decrease in the electric generation emissions by 2030. And I'll illustrate that here on the next slide. On this stacked kind of bar chart or area chart, you see that the electric generation sector is the orange shaded area at the bottom of this graph. Again, this is a combination of historical actual data along with projection data out to 2030. So that orange piece of the graph at the bottom is the electric generating sector. You can kind of see how it begins to shrink quite dramatically over time as you approach 2030. The piece on top of that, which is the transportation sector, that's kind of the gray slice of the chart, does not decrease as rapidly over time when you start looking out to the future. So I thought this was a great illustration to make that very point, that the transportation sector is the sector that we really need to begin focusing on as a state. And we have been, and I'll talk about that more shortly. So let's take a look at just the transportation sector and zoom in a little bit more at the distribution of those transportation sector GHG emissions by vehicle type. Okay, and it's no surprise that the vehicles that we all drive, the on-road light-duty gasoline vehicle, passenger vehicles account for 72%. But the next leading category is the category we're here talking about today, and that's the on-road medium and heavy-duty vehicles. That's the red slice of the pie, accounting for 16% of the total transportation GHG emissions. So that's 16% of the 36%, or about 5.8% of the total GHG emissions come from this sector. That's nearly as much as what comes from the combination of the residential and commercial sectors. All right, so let's talk a little bit about reducing transportation sector emissions in North Carolina. This has been a priority and remains a priority for the state. Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 80 back in 2018, and it serves as an important launching point for reducing greenhouse gas emissions overall in North Carolina. It provides advances for clean transportation options for the purpose of lower GHG emissions, as there are light-duty zero-emission vehicle goals and plans developed as part of that initiative. Next, Governor Cooper signed the Medium and Heavy Duty Memorandum of Understanding in July of 2020 with 15 other states, now up to 17 states. The Medium and Heavy Duty ZEV MOU is an electric transportation policy with aspirational goals. Its focus is to advance and accelerate the market for electric and medium duty vehicles, and to achieve at least 30% of all new medium and heavy duty sales in 2030 be zero emission vehicles, and all new medium and heavy duty vehicle sales be zero emission vehicles by 2050. And those goals align very much so with the proposed rulemaking. Then we'll show you some of that data here shortly. Next, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 246 in January of 2022. It laid out goals and plans for reducing GHG emissions by further increasing registered zero-emission vehicles in the state and increasing the sales of ZEVs. It also directed the Department of Transportation to develop a clean transportation plan, which includes medium and heavy-duty ZEVs. That clean transportation plan is expected to be finalized by DOT in April of 2023, and our division is providing technical support for that effort. And of course, Executive Order 271, which I described on my earlier slides. Okay, so I mentioned DOT's Clean Transportation Plan work. There are a number of work group areas and lots of moving pieces and parts in the development of that plan. And our division is most involved with the medium and heavy duty ZEV work group, where a variety of efforts are being discussed. In fact, they're taking a look at a regional action plan amongst those MOU states that was developed. It contains over 60 recommendations on ways to lower emissions from this particular segment. Now, the North Carolina Focus Group is now reviewing that list and considering recommending a number of options from that list that make the most sense for North Carolina from both a non-regulatory and regulatory perspective. The ACT rulemaking would become a significant piece to that chapter of the Clean Transportation Plan. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the work that the state is doing to reduce emissions through funding opportunities. As many of you are aware, our Division of Air Quality is the lead agency on the administration of the Volkswagen settlement funds. We've been working on that for a few years now. It's obviously a complementary piece to the overall efforts to reduce NOx, PM 2.5, and greenhouse gas emissions. Phase one of that effort resulted in $30 million of awards, and they are in various stages of being implemented now. Phase two is in progress. We started rolling out announcements of awards for some of those categories. I announced some of those, one of those late-breaking news yesterday during the Air Quality Committee. Some of the examples of some of the projects we've awarded in phase two, $13.6 million for 61 clean transit buses, 25 of which were electric. Additionally, we've awarded under Volkswagen phase two, $30.1 million for clean school buses, where more than half of that funding for that category went toward electric school buses. In both Phase 1 and Phase 2, Volkswagen, the State Energy Office, provided supplemental funding of strategic electric infrastructure projects, and they will play a large role in future investment jobs, Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act opportunities. There are other active funding opportunities under the DAQ Diesel Emission Reduction Act federal grant program. There's a request for proposal open now through next Monday. There's $1 million available. So there's information provided on this slide about how to apply for that. And under the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI plan, North Carolina expects to receive something on the order of $109 million to build out EV infrastructure along its approved corridors over the next 5 years. So this effort is being managed by NCDOT, and efforts under these early initiatives are very much aligned with the requirements under Executive Order 271. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about the importance of the transportation sector in our PM 2.5 emissions profile. First off, 32% of North Carolina's fine particle pollution, or PM 2.5 emissions, come from medium and heavy duty vehicles. We are currently attaining the PM 2.5 ambient standard statewide. However, EPA is likely to propose lower or more stringent PM 2.5 standards very soon. So let's take a look at what the possible impacts could be from a lower or more stringent standard in North Carolina. So I'll walk you through this graph, but I'll begin by explaining where EPA is in their process. And it's EPA's Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, or CASAC. They finished up their work reviewing the PM 2.5 standards earlier this year. And they recommended to lower or strengthen the annual PM 2.5 standard, currently set at 12 micrograms per cubic meter. As part of that process, the CASAC submitted a majority report and a minority report to EPA. The majority report recommended an annual PM 2.5 standard be set between 8 and 10 micrograms per cubic meter, and the minority report recommended a range between 10 and 11 micrograms per cubic meter. So on this graphic, you see the current annual PM 2.5 standard is shown at the top, the red dashed line at 12 micrograms per cubic meter. The CASAC minority report is the shaded green area between 10 and 11 micrograms, and the CASAC majority report range is shaded yellow between 8 and 10 micrograms per cubic meter. So each line on this graph represents a PM 2.5 ambient monitoring site in North Carolina. And if you focus on the right-hand portion of the graph, which is the latest available design value, you see we have a number of sites that are within the range of the majority report. Those monitors are in Charlotte, Hickory, Lexington, Winston-Salem, and Raleigh. They're all above the lower end of the majority report recommendations for the annual standard. Those happen to be areas with significant medium and heavy duty vehicle populations and vehicle miles traveled. So a strategy that further reduces PM 2.5 from medium and heavy duty vehicles in North Carolina is prudent. If EPA finalizes a new PM 2.5 standard in 2023, the data that would be used for designations would likely be the 21 through 23 data or the 22 through 24 data. All right, so let's finish up with a summary of some of the Clean Air Act provisions that are in play, review the ACT standards and participants, and some of the next steps. So under Section 209 of the Clean Air Act, the state of California is required to request and be granted a waiver from US EPA in order to implement any vehicle emission standards that are unique and not less stringent than the federal standards. California has requested such a waiver for the ACT rule. And EPA took comment on California's waiver request for ACT this past summer until August 2nd, 2022. Final action from EPA is anticipated very soon. Under Section 177 of the Clean Air Act, other states are authorized to choose to adopt California's vehicle emission standards in lieu of the federal standards. And states are not required to seek EPA approval before adopting the California standards because a federal action, the waiver, authorized that option or regulatory pathway. And for historical reference, the EMC has used its authority previously to adopt a California vehicle emission standard. In that action, the EPA regulations applying to heavy-duty diesel vehicles were delayed by administrative processes, thus leaving a concerning 2-year gap and concerns about backsliding at a time that attainment was very much hanging in the balance in North Carolina. And so that rule reference is there on the slide 2D 1008. All right, let's move on to just a quick summary of the standard in the proposed Advanced Clean Trucks rule. The standards consist of sales targets of zero emission vehicles by model year for each of the various classes of medium and heavy duty vehicles as illustrated here. The onus is on the manufacturers of the vehicles. The manufacturers are the regulated entity in this rule, not buyers. Manufacturers can trade credits under this program, and California has developed a tracking system for the manufacturers that would be available to the state of North Carolina to apply here. There are other details related to the program we won't cover in detail today, but will be part of the presentation as we bring draft rule text and a fiscal note presentation back to the Air Quality Committee in a number of months. I'll note here that given the projected potential rulemaking process takes some time, plus the 2-year runway that's necessary once such a rule is adopted, a compliance runway to be fair to the manufacturers, the model year 26 or 27 would probably be the target entry year under North Carolina's ACT proposed rule.
Michael, before you move on,
Mr. Carr.
then I have a question about that. Let's go back to that slide real quick.
Yes, sir.
So I agree with you that you're not going to get this rule in place in time to do a 2024. So does that mean that each of those percentages moved down, or you just jump to the, I think you said 2026, start at that level?
That's an excellent question that we are researching right now, Commissioner Carter, whether you start at the 2024 levels in 2026 or 27, or you just, whether you toll it or whether you parachute in at that level, something that we're looking into.
Okay.
All right, so there are a number of states that have already adopted the ACT regulation. California, Oregon, Washington, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. You can see the beginning model year for their particular efforts. California is very much aligned to begin first, and the 2-year runway would begin upon 2-year clock and runway would begin upon issuance of the waiver by EPA. There are other states that are in the process of rulemaking for adopting the ACT program as well. Vermont has recently finished taking comment on their rule package. Colorado is asking their commission in December to move forward to public hearing. Connecticut just had legislation passed giving authority to adopt. Maine held an initial public meeting on this topic, and other states are very actively evaluating entry at this time. All right. So a critical next step includes an outreach process to make sure we're all hearing all perspectives on this effort, making sure we're getting meaningful engagement and involvement from folks as we prepare to enter the rulemaking process. Strong stakeholder engagement in North Carolina's efforts will be a central part of this program, and some of the key principles that we would apply in that outreach process include great two-way communications, information sharing, providing formal and informal opportunities for comment and input, strong stakeholder engagement, which includes building relationships and fostering participation in EJ and community groups in this clean transportation initiative. And of course, our skilled technical staff will be undertaking an analysis of the benefits and the costs of the proposed rulemaking actions, so the commission will have that to inform decision-making. Okay, so a proposed rulemaking timeline. We're here today introducing the concept. We expect to come back with that rule text and a fiscal note to the Air Quality Committee at their May meeting, which would put us on track to come back to the full commission with a request to proceed to public hearing and comment at the July EMC meeting. A public process would be commenced in that July through September timeframe in the summer of 2023 and put us on track to come back to the full commission with a hearing officer's report and potential adoption in November of 2023. And after going through the Rules Review Commission process, a potential effective date, January of 2024. Again, I noted earlier, there's a 2-year compliance runway for the affected regulated entities here, the manufacturers. So again, the first set of sales targets would apply to either model year 26 or 27 vehicles based on this tentative timeline. All right, well, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'd be glad to take questions.
There are other questions for Mr. Abrazinskis. Mr. Davis.
I have a couple. Now, this rule affects manufacturers, so only the manufacturers actually in North Carolina. Is that their headquarters? Is that their actual manufacturing sites? How does it apply to those manufacturers?
It would apply to manufacturers who sell these vehicle classes in North Carolina. They don't necessarily have to be manufacturing the vehicles in North Carolina. It's really all about the sales of vehicles in these weight classes in North Carolina. And so it applies to those manufacturers of those medium and heavy duty vehicles.
So it's really not manufacturing, it's about selling the number of vehicles more than the actual manufacturing of the vehicles.
That's correct. And so the sales standards apply back to the manufacturers.
And this may be out of your purview, but do you have any idea about the comparative cost of these zero emission vehicles to the standard vehicles?
Yes, that's obviously something that's going to be part of our staff's very detailed analysis as we could bring the full package back to the AQC. So I don't have any specific data here today to share with you. I will share, one of the things I highlighted in this is the tremendous opportunities under the investment, the IIJA and the IRA, where there are a number of incentives and grant programs to help offset some of the capital costs of those vehicles. So getting a hold of the details of those programs, especially under the under the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, where all those details are not yet clear. We hope to have some more of those details by the time we're finalizing the fiscal note and coming back to the committee in May.
And finally, you mentioned the grants that were available yesterday under I don't remember the program, I think the Volkswagen settlement.
Yes, ma'am.
It would be interesting to see what the cost of those charging stations are, since there's a specific amount available for the grant itself, how that compares to the overall cost of those individual units.
Yes, ma'am, and that's an important note, and part of what I mentioned here today, and part of those other sections of the EO, making sure that we are putting all efforts into growing this infrastructure and the electric vehicle ecosystem for the medium and heavy duty sector. These are different rated chargers and infrastructure that will be needed for medium and heavy duties relative to the now evolving and building out of the light duty charging sector. These will be different. And so different ratings, different requirements.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Carter? Commissioner Bailey?
Just by way of background, I used to be on the Raleigh Transit Authority Board, and in particular, the Finance Committee. I was last a member in 2018, but when I was a member and we were looking at replacing their fleet, because they replace their portions of their fleet every 20 years. So when it comes up to 20 years for particular vehicles, then we look at replacing that group of vehicles. So the last time around, we looked at the compressed natural gas vehicles versus electric vehicles. And a couple of the issues were that the technology wasn't there for electric, so we decided to go with compressed natural gas. But one of my questions is I have a couple of kind of broad questions is, okay, so they aren't replacing their entire fleet every 20 years. It's just the ones that are 20 years old. And so they're coming out in different waves of purchases. And how does that work with the rule? The other thing is that we looked at that was quite expensive was the maintenance shop, because they maintain their own vehicles, and to have some, compressed natural gas versus the old diesel and then electric, that all has to do with employee training and even what's in the shop. It's completely different. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't want to jump to electric at that point because we didn't know exactly where the technology was. And so I guess what I was thinking is some of the cost of, say, local government might be a little bit higher than, say, somebody just buying a truck and, putting it on the road. So it's different for some of these entities. So I guess I wanted to point out some of the difficulties with local government and see how like the fleet replacement works with what you're proposing.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot that's evolving on that front each and every day. Very, very rapidly. I think you see what's happening now with the medium and heavy duty sector. Fleets are some of the early adopters. And they're finding that maintenance costs are lower for an electric vehicle. And so there's definitely some great value there. Training is certainly part of this overall effort, making sure that we have the workforce available. That was also addressed in the executive order and one of the other sections, and part of this kind of bigger picture strategy beyond just the narrow focus of a rule here at the EMC. It's part of building out that ecosystem. We've got to work with all our sister agencies to make sure that we've got a trained workforce for what's coming. And making sure we're working with our utilities to make sure we have the right power requirements in the right places, right, for charging infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And we could talk all day, but yes, those are all critical things and part of this comprehensive stakeholder outreach we're going to need to do as part of this process.
Just to follow up on Commissioner Bailey's question before I go to someone else, in terms of fleet replacement, as I understand the way the advanced clean truck rule works, it's a percentage, it applies a percentage to the number of vehicles in those categories that the manufacturer is selling in North Carolina. So it wouldn't force fleet owners to turn over their fleet any faster. The percentage is just a percentage of however many vehicles the manufacturer is selling in the state. Is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement, absolutely. And certainly what's one of the benefits of this program is making sure that those vehicles are here and available for purchase for fleet owners. That's one of the big things I probably failed to emphasize enough during the earlier parts of the presentation is making sure North Carolina is getting its shipment of these vehicles, especially considering the amount of federal money and incentives, incentives that's on the table for North Carolinians right now and over the coming year or two. So yes, all very good points. Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Keene?
Comment on transportation conformity. Question on the transportation conformity piece. When we are discussing automobiles on the building side, but let's go to the traveling side and look at the emissions of automobiles. And you've got where the SIP program, likely you got MPOs that are stakeholders that are bringing the information. But what about the RPOs? I know the federal part comes up under the MPOs, the Metropolitan Plan Organizations, but when you get to the rural planning organizations, you bring in the council governments and you get in the rural areas. And if emissions are, the way I understand it, if emissions are not in line, then we could possibly lose those federal dollars and not qualify. So wouldn't a stakeholder, an RPO, be a stakeholder as well?
Absolutely, and they are, and they have been in our transportation conformity processes through the years, both the MPOs and the RPOs. The RPOs are often represented by DOT in those discussions, but have always been part of the discussions when we had to do transportation conformity. Thankfully, we're not in a non-attainment status currently. We are in attainment of all the national ambient air quality standards. So some of those more onerous transportation conformity analyses are no longer required, but with standards possibly lowering or getting more stringent from EPA, we've got to be mindful of that, and we want to do our best to avoid getting back into that situation. Over 2,600 days straight in attainment of all national ambient air quality standards here in North Carolina. We want to make sure we're positioning ourselves to keep that counter going.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Carter?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on a couple of things that you and Commissioner Davis had asked about. It just occurred to me, you made the point that it's not a question of the manufacturer in the state, but simply what's offered by manufacturers selling into the state. But then the percentages we just saw on that chart, does the manufacturer going to be responsible simply for providing that, say 30% of the vehicles they provide to this state to be sold in the state, to pick a number, on the lots to be sold? But what about actual purchases? I mean, are you going to be tracking actual purchases? Is that going to be where they're going to be? Is that where the compliance comes, or just providing them within the state? Because if they're not sold, then
That's an important point, and the purchase data is what would be tracked in the system. So yes, sir, that's correct. It's purchase data, sales data targets here.
okay. Also, let's go back to electric just for a second. Are you looking at electric powered vehicles? Is that going to be the technology of, what do you think, of choice, or the only thing that's going to be offered here?
It's zero emission vehicle.
Right.
So that's a good question under this particular framework. Let's take a look at that. If another technology evolves that's zero emission, would that count under this program? Is that the root of your question?
Well, essentially, yeah, and it also goes to what I haven't followed the California rulemaking on this, but do you know if they're looking at, in fact, whether either even the electric technology exists for these classes of engines? I mean, I know they do for light duty, although California's got a problem even keeping those charged. But now when you're jumping up to medium and heavy duty vehicles, you're talking about, as you pointed out, much larger charging capability is going to have to be installed for infrastructure for electrics.
Technology is most certainly here. In fact, we have funded several electric vehicles in these weight classes through our Volkswagen work. And so some of those examples I mentioned earlier with the transit buses and the school buses as being some really good examples. But yes, the technology is most certainly here, but building out that infrastructure is a critical piece. And that's why the EO speaks to that and all the processes that must be put in place to make sure that's
for medium duty and limited range vehicles, you're probably right. But what about long haul tractor trailers?
Mm-hmm. The technology's there.
And the infrastructure too?
This infrastructure work needs to continue to evolve.
Okay.
Other questions for Mr. Abrazinskis? Commissioner Keen?
Follow up on Commissioner Carter and Commissioner Davis's point on infrastructure. Infrastructure costs throughout the rural area, long hauling. They don't like to get into the metropolitan areas because they're hauling long and they try to stay out of the traffic. So infrastructure and having the dollars is going to come, I think, from the rural planning organizations, and that is not, RPOs is not listed in the transportation framework. So it needs to be added. And it says NCDOT for Metro MPOs. It says or, it doesn't say and. So I think, and it leaves out RPOs completely. But the RPOs are a directive that comes from the state on the Council of Governments piece. And that you need to have that stakeholder at the table discussing infrastructure. throughout the rural areas.
That's great feedback. Thank you very much. I agree completely.
Other questions, Commissioner Deerhag?
Commissioner Ross.
Commissioner Modis?
Thank you. Thank you for the excellent presentation. I really like how you laid out the overall context and how this fits within the context, because as you know, there's a lot going on that is supportive of this potential rule. And one of those factors I just want to ask a little bit more about, so with other states starting to implement this, I don't know a whole lot about like who these manufacturers are. Are they national manufacturers? I'm guessing yes, probably. So how do you think that interplay with this already being implemented in multiple states ahead of North Carolina might affect those manufacturers' familiarity and readiness to comply with this kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think one of the earlier points made was many of these manufacturers already have commitments to similar-ish type of goals, corporate sales goals. In fact, a few, I think, have goals that exceed some of the numbers you would see in the standard that we showed on the slide earlier. But I don't have that rundown for each of the manufacturers currently. We'll hopefully have that by the time we come back to the AQC. But so it's just a matter of making sure, if you've got a patchwork quilt of adopters across the U.S., we need to make sure we're positioned to get the vehicles in North Carolina and then take advantage of what's on the table with regard to some of the infrastructure dollars over the coming years. I think there's a lot of work to do, but we are as well positioned as we've ever been to accelerate a transition to significantly lower emission transportation sector.
It's a really interesting point because, and this will come out as we learn more about it, but we might not be making the manufacturers do anything. It's just making sure that what they are already making is available here. I hadn't thought about it that way. Thank you.
Other questions, Commissioner Deerhag?
Thank you. I have 3 or 4 because it was such a comprehensive presentation. Thank you. It's very helpful to see all of that. And I really appreciate and applaud the forward thinking from both the governor and from the department. So my first point was that we were talking in the early part of the presentation about 2 different baselines, 05 and 09. How are you going to try and work with 2 different baselines to demonstrate progress? Because we have 09 you were referencing for the vehicle, the heavy and medium duty vehicle progress. But we had an earlier 05 baseline for just the overall state progress. How are you going to make those jive?
Very good question. I think 2005 is the baseline period in most of, or all, I believe, of the executive orders and other policy instruments that we're working with in North Carolina. And so I would say at this point that it's 2005 is our baseline period. But there are other potential reference points as we continue to update our emissions inventory for the key sectors on an every other year cycle that will establish a more recent baseline or kind of on the books current snapshot of what our emissions profile looks like. So I think it depends on the application and how we measure success. Now, for the rule itself, it's all about sales of these vehicles. But for tracking progress on emissions, the current baseline is 2005.
Okay. And I'll probably be dating myself, and excuse the pun, but I think we're going down a similar road with the implementation of a standard such as this compared to what the commission faced with the adoption and implementation. You can help me remember this with the California heavy-duty diesel engine rules and the sulfur, primarily focusing on technology from manufacturers that would reduce sulfur and maybe nitrogen rules on nitrogen emission reductions too. We ran into, I mean, we successfully adopted those rules, but later on were challenged by it. And eventually, I think we lost some of that rule applicability through, we were overridden maybe. But we continued to face challenges with that about questions such as, is the sales coming from in-state or are the trucks being bought out of state and brought in, and how you measure and monitor and enforce a rule when you have manufacturers out of state. So I'm hoping there are lessons learned from the applicability and implementation of that rule that could be used here to help avoid some of the roadblocks that we ran into in the past. Because that was a very useful rule at the time, and I think there are things that we can learn from that here as well. About the CASAC and PM 2.5, and for the members who don't know, CASAC means Clean Air Science Advisory Committee, and it is strictly an advisory committee to the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. I know Commissioner Carter is very familiar with this, but there have been changes in membership, significant changes in membership in the previous administration of the SAB and probably the CASAC too, but I was just checking while you were online, and it seems to have turned over again. I don't recall how often CASAC members are reappointed, but for this particular PM 2.5, you talked about a minority and a majority report, and those are advisements to EPA, OAQPS. They are not, carved in stone and adopted necessarily. So what is your opinion about the minority number versus the majority number? And is that number also taking into consideration PM fine particulates, which are aerosol generated from nitrate that's also in the ambient air, and sulfate, ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate, PM fine.
So, the CASAC is the body of experts. That's the body of experts that really poured over all of the risk assessment and health data related to inhalation risk. I've heard a number of presentations of their work and their summary. I can't say that I'm qualified to offer an opinion. I certainly have my best professional judgment, but I wouldn't want to offer a prediction or a thought on what's most appropriate. Again, they've looked at all of that health assessment data to present the recommendations that we've discussed here today. I have no greater intelligence than they do, and have certainly not reviewed the information like they have.
I was just curious about what the numbers were. How many were in the majority? How many were in the minority?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I do believe there were only one or two in the minority, and the rest were in the majority. It is noteworthy that there's an overlapping number between the majority and the minority, and that's 10. But yeah, I think I don't have much else to add.
And when is EPA scheduled to make its decision about this? I mean, I know the annual the 5-year ORD review came out a year or so ago, I think.
To quote EPA, very, very soon on a proposal. I believe I also heard one of the EPA higher level staff mention before the end of the calendar year for a proposal.
Okay. All right. And if you just bear with me, I had one other comment, and that was thanking Commissioner Bailey for her service on the City of Raleigh planning a committee for this. I didn't realize that you did that. Thank you. I have lived in this city since '83, I think it was, and Commissioner Bailey lived here a long time too. And it always has frustrated me, especially the last 15 years, to be around diesel emission buses. And I do understand the practical issues of transitioning over into compressed natural gas and electric vehicles. I do hope that
the city and its new leadership that just was elected a couple of days ago can work to make this happen faster than it's happened in previous years. So I think we've got the technology and the momentum behind us to make this happen in the larger cities now. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Abrazinskis? Not seeing any. I do have one. This isn't exactly a question, but a suggestion. In terms of the timeline you were showing coming back to the Air Quality Committee in May of next year with the draft rules and the regulatory impact analysis. And I guess one question I would raise, not to be resolved today, but perhaps for you to discuss with the chair of the committee is whether it would be helpful to actually come back sooner, or perhaps March, with at least what you have in terms of rule draft. It seems like it may be a big ask to come to a meeting for the first time with what will be a fairly complex rule draft and a regulatory impact analysis and expect to move it quickly. And committee members may have input earlier on at least draft language. So if that's doable, I would just ask that you work with the committee chair and on whether that is a reasonable thing to do so that we're not seeing it and trying to act on it even in committee at one meeting. That may be a bit much. Commissioner Modest, what do you think?
I agree. And after having seen this great presentation, maybe just as you learn more about how the rule actually works, kind of like how we did with Reggie, here's how this works, that kind of presentation more in depth, I think would be really helpful in setting us up for considering, the actual rule that you're proposing.
No other questions? Really appreciate it. That was an excellent presentation.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate y'all.
So we are at concluding remarks in record time this year. So we will start in reverse order since Mr. Abrazinskis just sat down. So Director Wren, do you have any remarks on behalf of your division?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I just have one small item. Well, not small, but one quick item. Danny Smith, who is our stormwater program manager, will be retiring at the end of this month. Danny's 30-year career with the department includes work in various programs for Division of Water Resources and with the Division of Energy, Mineral, and Land Resources, such as 401 Compliance and Enforcement Supervisor, DWR, Raleigh Regional Office Supervisor, Director of DMLR, Director of DWR, and currently the DMLR Stormwater Program Manager. Danny has a profound effect on the department and the people with whom he's worked. I've known Danny personally since the late 1990s, and when he was instrumental in compliance work with ditching and draining of wetlands in the wake of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Tulloch ruling. Danny is a consummate professional with an even-keeled, common-sense approach to problem solving and a great sense of humor. His office presence, experience, and knowledge will be greatly missed. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention because Mr. Smith certainly has had a long and productive career with the department. We appreciate that. A sense of humor is always a good thing. Director Scott.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me, members of the commission, and welcome new members of the commission also. We had the pleasure last week of working with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office to host 6 delegates from the country of Moldova and 1 facilitator with a keen interest in waste management. Several of them were mayors and vice mayors from that particular country. We took them on a tour of North Carolina's waste management and recycling facilities, tried to convey a lot of information that hopefully will help them with a lot of the struggles they're facing in their country, but a very rewarding experience for us. I'd like to thank Division of Water Resources staff, the department, and also the Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service. It was a huge collaborative effort. Also the host families in Raleigh and Wilmington that hosted these delegates at night as we took them around North Carolina's great infrastructure on the waste management front. We also continue a lot of work in the Lower Cape Fear region as we try to keep this commission updated on that ongoing work. This is tied to the PFAS impacts from the Chemours plant in Bladen County, North Carolina, and the Lower Cape Fear private well sampling that's underway. There's approximately 2,000 private well water results that have been received by Chemours and DEQ. Have about 450 private well owners that are eligible under the consent order now for an alternate water source. So a lot of continued PFAS work in that region and also around the Bladen County plant. We also continue to work actively on that Colonial Pipeline release that we've kept the commission updated on. We are looking at a revised comprehensive site assessment and additional work related to PFAS sampling related to groundwater at that site for this approximate 2 million gallon petroleum release that occurred in Huntersville. So those are the main items for today. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to update the committee.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Scott concerning his report? If not, Director Rogers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commission members, a few things that I'd like to report on. The first item I've noted in my director's brief, but as of November 1st, we removed the IMAC for PFOA, which we thought was appropriate. And we did that by request from the North Carolina Conservation Network and the Southern Environmental Law Center, and believe that that was an appropriate thing to do. We continue to work on emerging compounds in our efforts with groundwater, surface water, and drinking water. I will tell you that the bounds of emerging compounds and work, it continues to expand with our division. We're beginning to look into biosolids as well, which we're finding is a critical and an important issue related to those emerging compounds. I'd also like to, we talked a little bit about this in committee, but we continue to have great challenges as it relates to staffing. We are down, I think this week, 118 positions out of 460. And I will tell you that things are looking up. We're getting more efficient in our processes and hiring. I think we're doing a better job with regards to that. And I don't think this is just in DWR, but it's department-wide. And I'd also like to thank the department for their focus and efforts in trying to help us retain our great employees so that we continue the good work that they do. So that's it. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Rogers? Mr. Abrazinskis.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning again, everyone. Welcome to the new commissioners. Look forward to working with you. Quick staffing update to begin this morning. Want to welcome Katie Quinlan as our new Rural Development Branch Supervisor in the planning section of DAQ. You heard from Katie on the first agenda item today. She joined our Rural Development Branch in October of 2019 as an engineer, was promoted to Engineer 2, and has worked on a variety of challenging projects over the last 3 years, including the RGGI fiscal note. Prior to joining DAQ, Katie worked for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for 5 years as an engineer in the Air Permits Division, and she earned her bachelor's in civil engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. She's completed her EIT certification as well. Katie replaces Patrick Nolson, who is our Rules Development Branch Supervisor, and he retired at the end of August. So welcome to Katie, and you'll be seeing a lot of her in the future. Also, consistent with Director Rogers' update on staffing, we are struggling as well on that front, and I think that's consistent across all the two tables here this morning. We currently have 35 vacancies in DAQ. That's about 17.5% of our total of all positions are vacant, but we are making progress as well. And we're starting to see a few more candidates in our candidate pools and working great with our department and getting a great level of support. to work to fill those positions as rapidly as possible. Concurrent with the staffing shortages in DAQ, we're facing a wave of retirements, potential retirements, 40 within the next 2 years, 80 within the next 5 years. So can you say succession planning and continuity planning and workforce planning? We're doing a lot of that and spending a lot of time on that for sure while managing the significant staffing shortage. So I just wanted to share that with you this morning. In committee yesterday, I gave a number of updates on EPA actions we're following. I'm not going to get into those in any detail, but just list them off briefly for you this morning. We're following potential clarifications, revisions to EPA's minor new source review program. We're also following the aforementioned revision to the PM 2.5 NAAQS. We are watching and following EPA's release of some principles for addressing environmental justice in air permitting. We're also reviewing and following a number of non-regulatory dockets that EPA just opened with regard to the Inflation Reduction Act funding to address air pollution. States and locals and others are able to provide feedback and input on kind of how some of the details will evolve on some of those funding streams. And I think some of that is very relevant to the topic I just presented on earlier as well. So we'll be looking at that and providing feedback as well. So that's probably enough for me today. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Abrazinskis? If not, committee chairs, Commissioner Bailey, I know your committee didn't meet this time, but do you have any comments?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good.
I might as well make some comments now because my committee hasn't met for 3 times in a row. At any rate, we have a lot of new members on the committee, and except for Commissioner Keene and myself, we have new members. So I was going to talk to Director Scott and Rogers about doing kind of a basic review for all the new members to know more about these 2 divisions that are part of this committee. And I think that, and we'll be talking next week, I think, on that. As you know, I'm part of the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan Steering Committee along with Commissioner Anderson. And the next meeting has been set for December 6th, and we're talking about implementation since the plan was approved earlier this year. Also, I was invited by the Executive Director, Kenny Waldrop of the Cape Fear Public Utilities Association to see their Sweeney water plant and their Northside wastewater treatment plant. And the Sweeney plant was putting the filtering system for PFAS on just the exact day that I was there. It hadn't been, they weren't announcing it that day because they were doing some testing, but it was quite impressive. I mean, the plant was spick and span. They really do a good job of operating. So that was very nice to be able to have him reach out to me and get that tour. And then last but not least, I want to congratulate you on your quickest meeting yet. I remember your very first meeting, Chair Smith, and it was a nightmare.
And it was not my fault.
No, it was not your fault.
Yes, I've earned this short meeting. I agree with that. Thank you.
And those are all my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Deercake, Water Quality Committee.
Yes, thank you. The committee did meet, but we had information items this time. First, we heard a presentation from a faculty member at UNC Wilmington on submerged aquatic vegetation and water quality, water clarity, Dr. Jessie Jarvis. This was a presentation that she made at an event in New Bern in October that both Vice Chair Harris and I attended, and we thought it would be beneficial for everyone to hear it. So thank you to those who attended and listened, and for anyone who was unable to attend, if you would like a link to one particular seminal article that she relied on, be glad to share that. She has experience in the Chesapeake Bay where they had a very successful restoration program for submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV. So she brings a lot of knowledge and experience from that. And the state is fortunate that she is serving on the Science Advisory Committee for the nutrient criteria development planning effort in that area. So we appreciated that presentation. Then we actually had an update on progress for the SAV water clarity standard from Karen Higgins, who leads our planning section. She reported that the SAC will have their third and what we are thinking might be final meeting in the next 1 to 2 weeks. And they are trying to finalize their recommendation on a standard and all the different aspects of that would be considered as we get prepared for a proposed rule to come to us. There is also another step in the process. There is a criteria implementation committee, which consists of some stakeholders to look at the practicality of implementing the standard. Again, it's an advisory committee. The staff will consider that as they go into rule drafting before they come to the Water Quality Committee with a proposed draft rule for consideration. So we, at that point yesterday, did not have an action item, but we did reach consensus that we wanted the division to continue the development of the SAV standard based on the completed work of the Science Advisory Committee, which is expected in the next 1 to 2 months, and the input from the Criteria Implementation Committee, and bring a draft rule to the Water Quality Committee. Our goal is to see it in the first quarter of 2023. We also had updates on 4 other topics, which are long-term projects before the committee and with the staff. The first is on the E. coli statewide standard that we have charged them with working on. They have completed the first of 2 seasonal monitoring projects, and the next one will be in the spring. So that we're seeing where the sampling sites are across the state and heard about that, as well as their long-term schedule. It does appear that their schedule for bringing a proposed rule in for adoption might be similar to the triennial review. E. coli and fecal coliform have been part of the triennial review. Our interest was in accelerating that schedule, and we're still hopeful that that could happen. I think there are still areas where they could find some efficiencies, such as in the QA review, if they have a sound plan in place for that, quality assurance. You may recall that in the previous year, we heard a petition for rulemaking to remove the aquatic toxicity standard for silver. That petition was denied. I think that's the right word to use. However, we charged the staff with conducting a literature review to understand the state of science and what has changed knowledge about silver toxicity in the aquatic environment. That literature review has been completed. We asked the staff to prepare at least a memo, if not a report, on their approach to the literature review and their findings. They agreed to do that. Staff is also talking with EPA on the possibility of amendments to the chronic toxicity standard to make it more useful and meaningful for the regulated community, including consideration of hardness in water. We also heard of an update on the Jordan Lake Nutrient Management Strategy. They have moved into a second round of lake modeling, which is expected to be completed in the fall of 23 by the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. The first phase was not able to be completed, and so between the findings of that first modeling and some time delays, they are proceeding with this second contracted modeling effort. After that, stakeholder participation will resume for the 2023-24 period, And the division expects the proposed rule could be provided to our Water Quality Committee and the full EMC in the 2025-2026 timeframe. This is a good 2-year extension of what had been done previously. We had a very good question from our chair yesterday asking if we had a deadline from the legislature on completing the rule, and we have none. That's the answer I heard. But that does not mean that we want do not want staff to continue moving at a good clip on this. It's been a long process. We heard about High Rock and Jordan, and what's going on now with the SAV are all models for nutrient criteria development planning for the state under the supervision of EPA and their participation in the process. So we're hoping that there are lessons learned along the way with these first starts in the lakes, the estuaries, et cetera, that can help build efficiencies if there are needs to develop site-specific standards such as these in the future. High Rock Lake itself, as you may recall, we adopted the nutrient standard in 2022, and the implementation rulemaking is beginning. They're getting great interest and participation at this stage, and they anticipate bringing a draft proposed implementation rule to us in 2025. And then the last information item we had was presented by Council Reynolds and Chair Smith, dealing with the work going on and discussions going on between Marine Fisheries Commission and Wildlife Resources Commission. Would either of you care to comment on that? Or I think you would do a much better job summarizing than I could.
I don't know if there's a short version of that conversation beyond saying that there have been discussions going on for a while between the Wildlife Resources Commission and the Marine Fisheries Commission that have to do with their respective fisheries jurisdictions, so not related directly to water quality at all. The Wildlife Resources Commission has for about 2 to 3 years been proposing that it's not exactly a conflict, but their discussion of their respective jurisdictions could be resolved by moving the boundary between coastal waters and inland waters, which is on a map somewhere in someone's office. It's referred to in multiple state statutes, and it becomes important for water quality because those state statutes define the scope of estuarine waters by reference to that dividing line between coastal and inland waters. So to the extent the conversations about regulating fish and fishing practices is moving in a direction of perhaps answering the fisheries question by moving the boundary, that does have implications for both the coastal management program and for potentially this commission's water quality program. So we just had the information item yesterday because the conversations between Division of Marine Fisheries and the Marine Fisheries Commission and the Wildlife Resources Commission are ongoing. We don't exactly know what direction those are going to take, but since the discussions have really picked up again recently, we wanted to at least make EMC members aware that this issue is out there, and depending on how those two other commissions decide to try to resolve their issue, we may need to do a little bit more work to understand exactly the impact on water quality regulations. So that is not a terribly short version, but it's probably about as short as it can get. And we'll just come back to you all. The Marine Fisheries Commission meets next week. They'll be talking about sort of the current state of their negotiations with the Wildlife Commission. And if that requires us to come back to the Water Quality Committee for some further work on this, we will do that. So right now we're just keeping an eye on it, but wanted to at least give everyone a heads up that this question is out there and we may need to do some work on it in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, so we'll do our best to capture it in the meeting minutes for those who weren't able to attend, so you can read up about the topic.
Commissioner Modest, Air Quality Committee.
Yes. Let's see. I wanted to, this was my first meeting as the chair of the Air Quality Committee. So I wanted to start by thanking Commissioner Arata, who was a great chair, and also Charlie Carter, who is swapping where he's being vice chair, but fortunately is still on our committee. I also want to welcome Chris Duggan to being vice chair, though he wasn't able to join us yesterday. And also our new member, Dr. Lyerly. Welcome to our committee. We had a very light agenda, but don't get used to it. Our only action item was around correcting some errors introduced during the rules readoption process. So that is moving forward. And then we heard about the agenda item that we already heard today. And so Director Abrazinskas provided some slightly longer comments looking forward for the committee. And so as you heard today, we've got the ACT coming through this committee. We still have Reggie coming through this committee, and we should see that fiscal note in January, and other stuff too. So it's going to be a busy 2023. So everybody get your rest during the holidays, and thank you.
And I'll just add, in terms of the Reggie rule planning horizon, just to let particularly new EMC members know, we do expect that the rules, the draft rules and the regulatory impact analysis will be on the committee agenda in January. And any commission member who is not a member of the Air Quality Committee is welcome to sit in on those committee meetings. You don't get to vote, but you are more than welcome to sit in and hear those presentations as a preview of what will ultimately come to the full commission.
And I'm sure I can probably offer on behalf of DAQ and myself, for our new members, happy to have some remedial Reggie conversations for our new members to make sure everybody feels ready to, understand what we're talking about and jump right in.
If there's a remedial class, I may have to sign up. Yes. So Commissioner McAdams.
Okay. Madam Chair, the Water Allocation Committee, after having not met since the January meetings, missing 4 others, we did meet yesterday. I eventually welcomed Commissioner Ruiz to the committee. And we had an information item, and that was a deep dive into interbasin transfer regulations and the certificate application process and the theory behind regulating interbasin transfers. This is in anticipation of a couple of upcoming matters, and that is that at the January meeting of the Water Allocation Committee, the Rural Water Association is going to come to us and seek some discussion, our inputs, our opinions on some advocacy they are then going to do to the legislature to modify the interbasin transfer regulations. And so this was just a warm up to get our minds re-immersed into interbasin transfer regulations. And then the other is the long discussed but perhaps delayed Fuquay-Varina application for an interbasin transfer certificate is going to begin to come to us either in January or in March. So yesterday's session was just a tune-up event for these upcoming matters. It looks like going forward we will be meeting in each bi-monthly session as these items come before us.
Thank you. So other commission comments. Commissioner Anderson?
Group 2 commissions will meet here in this room 5 minutes after their chair.
I think, let me let Council Reynolds address remissions, because I understand we may have to stagger meetings because of the availability of the legal counsel.
Yes, and Commissioner Anderson, as usual, I'm in your way, right? I think the bylaws provide that it's 15 minutes after the meeting you can start. But because my backup and my backup's backup are both unavailable today, I'll ask for your indulgence to have Civil Penalty Remissions Committee 1 meet in here first. You have 3 items on your agenda from the same town or from the same entity, and then Civil Penalty Remissions Committee 2 will start after the conclusion of 1, and there are 2 items, one of which has an oral presentation. So in order to allow sufficient time for the folks who are here to present to be heard, if you would allow me to order that, I would greatly appreciate the accommodation.
I will say we only have 2 items. Oh, first.
We have 3 and no orals.
I think the deciding factor was that Remissions Group 2 has the oral presentation, and so it may be more time effective to do the Remission Group 1 first. And that should go fairly quickly, I would expect. Mr. Carter.
You couldn't find a volunteer to serve as counsel
Right,
today?
my backup, for my backup, and my original backup now sits on your commission, so
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean,
I mean, she is still a better lawyer than I am by far. So I'm sure she would love to stretch her legs a little bit in her first meeting, but at the same time, perhaps it would be better if we just take in chronological order of committee 1 and then committee 2. Keeps it simple.
Commissioner Bailey, did you have any other comments today?
Just number 1 should go first.
Commissioner Carter? Commissioner Davis? Commissioner Deerhake?
Well, I also welcome the new members. I've known Ms. Weiss for years. As mentioned, she's come and helped us many a time with remissions. So we know you'll bring a lot, even to that committee. And we welcome you, and we welcome Dr. Lyerly. I've followed your work for years, and you've done very important research and analysis for our state Clean Smokes Act. We're very fortunate to have you on the commission, too. I also thank for the service Dr. Lazorick and Shannon Arata. They've been very valuable. I'm sure everyone agrees. And was a great hearing officer with Commissioner Carter on the methylene bromide. And so that was a big job, and we thank her for working with him on that and for leading the Air Quality Committee. And last, I congratulate and sincerely thank Danny Smith for his years of service. It was a privilege working with him when he was advising us on the Water Quality Committee. So thank you very much.
Mr. Modest? Mr. Harris? Mr. Keene?
Just want to comment on clarity on the different departments meeting, Wildlife Commission, Marine Fisheries. And it seems like mapping is an important piece of the puzzle during these discussions. So the more departments that can be a part of the mapping process, for new members, the mapping process on wetlands that we've gone through for the last 12 to 18 months on trying to decide lines of navigational aids or lack of, or the areas that Marine Fisheries and the Wildlife Commission and all that are coming. Maybe it takes everybody at the table to get a more adequate definition of where properties are to make those good decisions that we make, and these hard decisions that we have to make at times. So if it takes everyone getting together at the table, that's certainly a positive sign. But I have no other comments other than I appreciate Group 1 meeting here and not having to leave our warm seats. Thank you.
Commissioner Lyerly?
I want to say thanks for the warm welcome, and again, thanks to Lois for accommodating my addition onto the committee.
Thank you. Commissioner McAdams?
Madam Chair, just a point of order, if I may, just as to the remission committees 1 and 2 being head to tail, that inasmuch as Committee 1, I believe, has no representation from the single petitioner for the 3 remissions requests. In as much as Committee 2 has to wait for Committee 1, we do away with the 15-minute delay till we can start and go ahead and get Committee 1 done. Just a suggestion.
I'll defer to Mr. Reynolds, although I will also say we're also talking about how quickly you can run people out of the rooms and get set.
We can pitch
So
a
that's
big tent,
completely up to
everybody
you.
can stay, but okay, all right.
Continue the game of ping pong. I'll refer to the chair of Admissions Committee 1 and say as soon as he can clear everybody out that doesn't, need to be here and can drop his gavel. 5 minutes.
Okay, the chair of Remission Committee Group 1 says 5 minutes after adjournment. And that settles that issue.
May I ask who the new members are? Are there any new members?
There is one new member, and I don't remember who went on which remissions group.
2.
Which means Dr. Lyerly must, oh dear. I thought I put one on each.
I'll straighten that out.
We'll figure that out.
Okay, your email says they're both on group 2.
Okay, so you're both on group 2.
And Committee number 2, feel free to thank me for moving Committee.
Oh, Commissioner Weiss.
I certainly echo Dr. Lyerly's thanks to Lois and to the commissioners for this warm welcome that you have given me. I look forward to serving on this commission. As you've heard some reference to my past work with department staff and serving as counsel to a remissions committee. It's important work that the commission does, and it's a privilege to serve the state in this way, and I will give you my very best efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds, do you have any closing comments? Now that we've settled the remissions.
I don't think so, other than to echo the welcome to the new members and to express my also appreciation and congratulations to Danny Smith, who I've worked with for many, many years. And I'm not allowed to tell any stories because then he might start telling stories. So I'll just keep that at that.
That's probably prudent. So in the chair's comments, I do have a couple of comments related to some of the correspondence that commission members have received since the last meeting. And I'll start with the letter from a lawyer representing the town of Reidsville concerning the 1.4 dioxane standard that the commission adopted back in the spring. The letter requested an update on the status of that 1.4 dioxane rule. And as you recall, the commission voted in September to ask council to request that the Rules Review Commission, which had objected to that rule, return the rule to the commission in the expectation that the commission would seek judicial review of the objection. The status has not changed, and I just want to make it clear on the record that the status quo is the status quo, and when the rule is returned, and I would leave that to the discretion of the commission's counsel, who is really responsible for, at this point, communications with the Rules Review Commission and handling the potential judicial review to make decisions about the timing, but whatever the timing is of the return of the rule or of the filing of a petition for judicial review, the status quo will not change. So when the rule comes back from the Rules Review Commission, we will be exactly where we are now and where we've been for quite some period of time, which is that with respect to 1.4 dioxane, the standard will be calculated based on the narrative rule in 0208. That's where we are now. That's where we were before the rule was adopted. That's where we will continue to be until there's some resolution of the objection to the new rule, which simply codifies the number that results from that calculation. So I will follow up in writing with the lawyer who sent the letter, but I just wanted to say on the record, there is no change in the status quo. There will not be a change. And I think it is prudent and appropriate for the commission to defer to commission counsel with respect to the timing of any further action authorized by the commission. Are there any questions about that? Commissioner Carter?
I'm a little mystified about what's going on here, because if the rule is not in force, which it's not, the existing rules in force, do you have any idea what the point of this whole exercise is?
I do not.
Okay, I just thought I'd ask.
So the second letter was an email from the Stormwater Association sending again the letter that they originally sent in late August. So they sent a letter prior to the September meeting concerning local stormwater programs and a couple of issues related to local stormwater programs that may not be consistent with the EMC's rules. And we responded subsequent to the September meeting, and I know Mr. Rogers and his staff reached out to the Stormwater Association about the particular issues that they raised. And this is another situation where I think basically conditions have not changed. As you recall, there were 6 local governments whose local programs were not approved by the EMC and who are being required to make some technical changes to their stormwater ordinances or stormwater programs. Most of those were very straightforward, and if you recall, a number of them had to do with simply making the local ordinance consistent with a state statute with respect to how the ordinance dealt with existing development and redevelopment. So of the 6 that were not approved last summer and early fall, that represents one set of corrections or revisions that need to be made. There were a few other discrete problems with individual ordinances. But again, the situation really hasn't changed. There are some sort of broader issues raised in the Stormwater Association's letter that we may need to come back to after we work through this process and can determine whether we really have an issue for the commission to review and take some sort of action on. But I don't think we're at that point yet. And again, I will be happy to respond to the Stormwater Association. One of those issues is how local stormwater programs will use the new stormwater nitrogen and phosphorus assessment tool. So there is an existing tool that local governments are using. It's in the process of being revised, but that in itself is a process that they will be able to have input in. And I'll just ask if Mr. Rogers wants to add any more details in terms of the steps that the division will be going through to address some of these questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and since the last meeting, I've had the opportunity to meet with representatives of the Stormwater Association a couple times. I think part of the issue is just the implementation and having folks trained on the new revised SNAP tool as new stormwater plans come into effect. And we are working with them on that. We have reached out to them. Our staff is working on updating the SNAP tool. I think a beta draft version will be presented and comments will be asked for from the Stormwater Association as soon as possible. Then that will go out to notice the revised SNAP tool for 30 days for folks to comment on it as well. There is a schedule. I think the concern is around the 11 or 12 local stormwater plans that were approved by the board. The commission. And there is a schedule that we have there. And we feel like there's a 6-month time limit for the approval until the implementations of the plans. We have attempted in our letter to those stormwater programs that we will be very conscious of a delay in getting the SNAP tool out, and that our enforcement actions related to those programs will take that into consideration. Our interest is to make sure that everybody gets fully trained on the SNAP tool, the revised SNAP tool, and we look forward to that. We'll also be reaching out and hopefully having a staff meeting with the Stormwater Association later in the month to address the concerns they have in their letter related to requirements versus recommendations, to try to clear up some of the misunderstandings or the confusions around those issues as well. So we look forward to continuing to working with the Stormwater Association.
I appreciate that. And I would just ask, and I know you will do this, but I would just ask that you bring back to presumably the Water Quality Committee first, any update on those issues and any issues that you believe the commission may need to address. But I think we have a good timeline and process in place to work through those concerns. And I'll just add that with respect to implementation, there is, as you know, when we talked about this earlier this year, there is a timeline for implementation set in the EMC's rules. So once we approve these local programs, they have a certain time to begin implementing the revised program. And I think the strong message here is that the division is working with them to make sure that implementation is as smooth as possible. Everyone recognizes that, particularly with the revisions to this nitrogen and phosphorus assessment tool, people will need to be trained on that, and that will be taken into consideration. And this is not a situation in which local governments are subject to penalties for failing to meet a specific deadline. This is a process of working with them to get to the implementation, and everyone involved understands that that's what we need to do. So I appreciate the division's efforts and look forward to any report back on how those discussions go, and simply give us a heads up if you think there is an issue that the commission needs to resolve. And if there is nothing else, I believe that's the end of my list. So the meeting is adjourned, and I don't want to impinge on the 5 minutes. Have a great holiday. Look forward to seeing everyone in January. It will be a busier meeting in January than this one. So thank you very much.
20 after.
8 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair.